133 Canucks fans waiting in the YouTube live chat for us to go live on this emergency edition of Canucks Conversation. My name is Dave Quadrelli. Joining me is Harman Dial, emergency edition of Canucks Conversation, because the Vancouver Canucks have traded for Elias Lindholm. And folks, I know there's going to be a lot of new listeners of the show, a lot of first-time listeners of the show. Like I said, my name is David Quadrelli. I have been talking about Elias Lindholm for months. I was bringing him up as this pie-in-the-sky trade target. Never thought it could actually happen. And here we go. He's the best fit for the Vancouver Canucks. The Vancouver Canucks go out and get him. This team is all in. We're going to have a lot to talk about. People in the chat were saying, I don't know what to do with my hands. Please help calm us down. And I said in the chat, to obscure reference in the YouTube live chat, I said, I am the wrong guy to ask to calm you down at a time like this. Harman, you got the Canucks Army hoodie on. I love it, buddy. Your initial thoughts on the trade. Let's start there. We'll start with initial thoughts on the trade, the player, then we'll get to the package, because I think that's where a lot of people want to hear us talk about.
Yeah, I mean, my initial thoughts are Lindholm checks so many boxes that this Canucks lineup could have used. I mean, he's a great finisher, which is going to be useful for this Canucks team that needed another top six presence. He's a right shot centerman who's, I think, been winning faceoffs at a 55% clip there. So that's going to be massive for, situations, especially when you go into the playoffs and you need to defend a lead, for example. You can now have another center that you trust to win draws. He's excellent defensively. He's going to make an impact on the PK. He's also going to, I think, be an excellent fit on the power play, because as a right shot in both the bumper and net front, he has a lot of experience in those areas. And again, he's the type of player that doesn't need to have the puck on his stick to be dangerous offensively. He's an off puck attacker. That's going to be a big theme, I think, of today's show, as we discuss Lindholm's value, what he is as a player, how he scores a lot of goals. And that works because the Canucks power play, as constructed, they have a lot of puck handlers. When you look at Miller, when you look at Pettersson, when you look at Hughes, and now to have two right shot finishers in Besser and Lindholm, essentially, that you're able to rotate between the bumper and the net front. I really like the potential look of that. Not to mention, I know Lindholm's offensive numbers aren't particularly great this year, but the thing to keep in mind is his offensive production has fluctuated a lot depending on what type of line mates he's had, right? So in 2021-22, he was the third piece on that dominant first line with Matthew Tkachuk and Joni Jurmo. That's where he was able to sort of serve as a two-way backbone and finisher. And he scored 42 goals and had 82 points, finished second place in Selke Trophy voting. Now, last season, Tkachuk and Gaudreau obviously left. Now, Lindholm, for all that he does well offensively, he's not the dynamic play creator. I'm going to drive a ton of offense by myself. So predictably, there was a bit of drop off, but he still forged excellent chemistry with Toffoli, scored 62 points last year. Again, drove great two-way results as Calgary's 1C. And then this year poor guy loses Toffoli, he loses his top line winger again. So this year it's been a rotating cast of like Yegor Sharangovich, Jonathan Huberdeau, who's been underperforming, Andrew Mangiapane, and you're expecting him to carry the top line. Now, coming to Vancouver, he doesn't need to be the guy, which I think is going to be really helpful for his game. The fact that he's going to have more help, I think that's going to help him pop as a goal scorer.
Andrei Kuzmenko goes back the other way. That's the main piece of the trade, but I want to continue talking a little bit more about Elias Lindholm, the player. Grady, can you pull up this graphic from JFresh? JFresh posted his scorecard along with some thoughts on Kuzmenko, and we'll get it in a second. Grady's telling us he doesn't have it just yet. We're a little behind because, folks, this is an emergency edition, so anything's going to happen on a live show. But basically, Harman, what that graphic says and what JFresh talks about is that he's good at getting open for high danger looks rather than spending a lot of time with possession himself, which is similar to what you just said. So look, I look at this guy as a guy who can finish. He can play on the first power play unit. Like I think it's important to mention that it's the first power play unit he's going to be an impact player on. He's going to be first over the boards when you need to kill a penalty. Like this guy got Selke votes as the league's best defensive forward 2 seasons ago. I know he had the offensive output, 42 goals as well 2 seasons ago. But my goodness, this to me, this is a slam dunk great trade for the Canucks. And I love the player. I've talked about him a lot. I think you did a really good job of just kind of recapping who the player is. And I think that conversation will pick itself back up. But let's get into the return that Calgary gets for Elias Lindholm. They get Andrei Kuzmenko, a 2024 first round pick. And basically anything of value stops there. If you ask me, like anything of value right now stops there. A 2024 fourth round pick, Hunter Brzustewicz, and Joni Jurmo. We'll go piece by piece here, Harm. Let's start at Andrei Kuzmenko. Let's start there. Where did it go wrong in Vancouver for Andrei Kuzmenko is the question that a lot of fans are going to be asking. I think we all know the answer. It was with Rick Tocchet, right? Like he wasn't going to play for Rick Tocchet. And as you get closer to the deadline, this is a theme on our shows. We're live Monday to Friday usually, folks. 2 p.m. we are live Monday to Friday. Now, the thing that we've been talking about a lot in recent weeks, Harmon, is that this team doesn't have time to wait for Andrei Kuzmenko to figure it out. They didn't have time, which is why they made the trade. They didn't have time to wait for him to get over the sophomore slump, right? Like he has another season at $5.5 million after this. You don't have time. You don't have time to wait for this guy to figure it out. He wasn't going to be in the lineup if they played in playoff games, and ultimately that's what this team really needed. So they obviously make the roster swap of Kuzmenko for Lindholm. Obviously, Lindholm is a massive upgrade on Kuzmenko in terms of what he's going to bring to this Canucks lineup right away. But your thoughts on Andrei Kuzmenko going the other way?
Yeah, of course, you had to do it just for salary cap reasons to fit Lindholm. I'm not too surprised overall in terms of Kuzmenko not being able to fit with Rick Tocchet, just because sometimes when you're at a point in your team's evolution where you're trying to raise a standard, and that means all of a sudden you're changing the way in terms of the transition from Boudreau to Tocchet, how your team plays, how they forecheck, how they defend, the defensive habits. That doesn't happen without one or two players falling behind, right? Because Kuzmenko's defensive game was good enough for the rebuilding, underachieving Vancouver Canucks under Bruce Boudreau. It was fun because there were a lot of other players sort of in that same boat in terms of turning pucks over, in terms of not winning their board battles, not being good in defensive zone coverage. So there wasn't a spotlight on him. Now what essentially happened is Tocchet comes in and he says, we're going to play fast. We're going to play north-south. We need to win our battles on the forecheck. We need to apply back pressure. We can't be turning pucks over on entries. Everybody's able to raise that standard. When you look at somebody like Brock Besser, for example, had a really tough defensive year. Forget the goal scoring. He had a tough defensive year, but he's able to level up in a huge way. Same thing with JT Miller. A lot of other players on the roster, you look at somebody like Dakota Joshua, also elevating his two-way game. Connor Garland has elevated his two-way game this year. So now when everybody else is able to take that next step, the bar is raised, and Kuzmenko just fell behind. He's not that type of player who sort of fits with the way this team wants to play now. And when you combine it with the shooting percentage regression, I mean, shot 27%. The goal scoring was bound to fall off. And that's why even going into the season, like I wrote a piece breaking down the NHL's top 10 regression candidates, and Kuzmenko was one of the top players on that list.
Kuzmenko's going to get a lot of time. He's going to get a lot of time in Calgary. He's going to score his goals, and that's already being pointed out in the YouTube live chat. Folks, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to know when we are posting videos, when we are going live, and check us out wherever you get your podcasts. I know we got a lot of new people that are watching us for the first time, so be sure to stick around because we got good content all throughout the season and all throughout the year. Bali, a lot of people bringing up Bali, Harmon. That Bali trip is going to be brought up for a long time in this city. Let's move on to the next piece here. And one of the pieces of this trade that I'm going to focus on later is that Lindholm is a UFA after this year, right? Kuzmenko has another year at 5.5. So the Canucks get out of the contract. I think that's an underrated part of this that I don't think is being talked about a lot. We're going to touch back on that later. We'll revisit that, but just something I wanted to throw out there. The 2024 first round pick, that's probably going to be the 32nd overall pick. Let's be honest. It's going to be a late first round pick in all seriousness. So you've got that. The 2024 fourth round pick, reported by our pal Pat Steinberg over in Calgary, that the condition on the fourth round pick is that if the Canucks make the Western Conference final, the pick turns into a 2024 third round pick. So with the Canucks obviously making the Western Conference final, they will. 2024 third round pick is what that pick could become. Hunter Brzustewicz is the prospect that goes back, the prospect of note that goes back. Now, Brzustewicz, we've talked about him a lot, Harm. We've talked about the idea of trading him. I like the idea of moving him because it's good process. Right now, Hunter Brzustewicz's value as the leading point getter in the OHL as a right shot defenseman, his value is never going to be higher. But he is a bit undersized, and he is of that archetype, of that player archetype that you and I have discussed, Harm, where you're not really sure if it's going to translate to NHL success. There might be a world where Hunter Brzustewicz turns into a PP2, hell, even maybe PP1 quarterback, and he's an actual top 4 defenseman. There is a world where that happens. And if that happens, this trade looks a lot, I don't even want to say a lot. It looks slightly less good for the Canucks if that's what happens. But if we're playing the odds here, it is a lot more likely that Hunter Brzustewicz becomes organizational depth or, a bottom pairing defenseman at the absolute most. It's a lot more likely that those are the outcomes for this player. And that's nothing against Hunter Brzustewicz. Huge Lego guy. I really like Hunter. He's got a lot of Lego as well. He's got his Titanic. We've had him on the show before. Great kid, wishing him nothing but the best. But in terms of what the player could become, the odds of him hitting and becoming an actual top 4 NHL defenseman are low. They're lower than him not becoming that.
Absolutely. And you also have to keep in mind that ultimately the Canucks had to give up a quality prospect. It wasn't just going to be a first round pick. And of course, they were able to protect Willander and Lekaramaki there. Also, the other key part of it is keeping Nils Höglander, which we heard our pal Rick Dhaliwal speaking at various points earlier in the season that Höglander's a player that Calgary really wanted. And it makes sense because the Flames are in a retool situation. They're not trying to tear it entirely down. And I think that shows, considering when they made the Toffoli trade in the offseason, for example, they preferred a younger player that could play right away in Sharon Govich rather than going out and wanting pure prospects and draft picks. So, I mean, I don't know this, but I would guess that Calgary probably wanted Höglander as part of this deal as well. And so for the Canucks to part ways with Brzustewicz instead, I don't have a huge problem with it, especially because if he hits, think about what style of player he's going to be. He's going to be slightly undersized, offensive, power play type defenseman. The Canucks already have 2 of those types of defenders in Quinn Hughes and Filip Hronek. So you had to give up a quality prospect. I don't have a huge problem with it.
You brought up something interesting there, and that's that you had to give up a prospect. I tweeted this out, and I'm stunned. Like the YouTube live chat, it looks like a lot of people are saying this is good. I'm seeing some people throw out the word overpay, but I was just stunned at the replies to the Canucks Army tweet. A lot of people hating this trade. Look, folks, what we saw here is the Canucks literally throwing in a player, throwing in an asset like you would if you were playing NHL, the NHL video games, and you're trying to trade for a player. You're just trying to bump up that trade value bar by throwing in a bunch of spare parts. There's a great deal of quantity. There's very, very little quality in this trade going back to the Calgary Flames. Again, Hunter Brzustewicz is probably the most interesting piece. That's the biggest wild card. But in terms of what that first round pick is going to become, you have the best team in the NHL. You have the best record in the NHL at the time of this trade. And you're worried about a first round pick? You're worried about Joni Jurmo going the other way? Come on. Let's get a grip here, people. Let's get a grip. This is a good trade for the Vancouver Canucks. And we haven't even talked about Joni Jurmo yet, Harm. The Canucks didn't sign him. This was their last year to sign Joni Jurmo, and he wasn't going to get signed. He was not going to get signed. The Vancouver Canucks were not going to sign Joni Jurmo. Joni Jurmo is not a good player. Joni Jurmo is not going to play in the NHL. If Joni Jurmo plays 100 games in the NHL, I'll drink a bottle of ketchup. It's not happening. It's not going to happen. This is how I imagine the trade call going, Harmon, is they have it going finalized, right? And Craig Conroy's talking to his scouts, and one scout sits up and says, hey, I saw Joni Jurmo play. Go get Joni Jurmo. And Craig says, who? Okay, Jim, I'm being told we want Joni Jurmo. Jim Rutherford probably had to go, who? Oh, Joni Jurmo. Yeah, no problem. We can throw him in. It's a nothing burger. It's a total. I'm stunned he was even in the trade, first of all. But Joni Jurmo's not going to play in the NHL. Joni Jurmo's not going to be an impact player in the NHL. He's not even going to touch 50 games. But I'm not putting the ketchup at that. 100 games. If he plays 100 games in the NHL, I'll drink a bottle of ketchup. It ain't happening. He's a throw in there.
Yeah, and I wanted to just quickly say in terms of the overall price the Canucks paid. So this morning, Thomas Drance and I did a piece at The Athletic where we went over 10 potential rental targets for the Canucks to consider. Lindholm was one of them, and I was trying to project what would a realistic asking price be for Lindholm. And when you look at what Bo Horvat went for, essentially it was a first round pick. Aatu Ratu is a B grade prospect, pretty similar in terms of overall value to Hunter Brzustewicz. And then Beauvillier was a cap dump, same as Kuzmenko, essentially. Now, a lot of people argue, okay, well, Horvat was having a much hotter year last year than Lindholm is right now. But the thing to keep in mind is you also look at Ryan O'Reilly was dealt at last year's deadline. He only had 19 points in 40 games at the time that the Blues dealt him to Toronto. And yet it was O'Reilly and Noah Chari for a first, a second, and a third round pick. So you assume the third round pick is for Chari. That means Leafs essentially gave up a first and a second in that trade for Ryan O'Reilly, a top 6 center. A second round pick, again, that's pretty similar in value to Ratu, pretty similar in value to Brzustewicz. So my main takeaway was the fair market value price for Lindholm. And again, we wrote this morning, is around the ballpark of a first round pick and a B grade prospect or equivalent draft pick. So the Canucks gave up that, and then they tossed in Jurmo and a conditional fourth if they make the Western Conference Final. They paid market price. It was a fair return for Calgary, and it was a fair return for Vancouver to give up.
I'm honestly still surprised that they didn't have to give up Aatu Ratu or Vasily Podkolzin. Like, honestly, if you're Calgary and you're looking at that retool perspective, you would definitely want one of those guys more. I'm surprised that they didn't have to give up either one of them. Although I know you and I have had disagreements about those two players' trade value, so we won't get into it on this episode. But folks, we got a lot of past episodes you can go listen to. And hey, if you go back about 2 months, you can go find me talking about Elias Lindholm. Let's pull up that JFresh card here, Grady. Like, I didn't even mention it. Grady Sass is our producer, and Lachlan Irvin is our intern behind the scenes. But Jay Fresh tweeted this out. Elias Lindholm, reportedly acquired by Van now, is a two-way scoring center. He's an off-puck player specializing in getting open for high-danger looks rather than spending a lot of time with possession himself. Needs to play with strong passers and puck movers to excel. Harmon, I had this conversation with someone recently, very recently, because this trade happened, and my friend texted me and said, oh, Elias Lindholm hasn't scored much this year. His offense has gone down. Elias Pettersson was playing with 2 cinder blocks on his wing. Elias Pettersson's going to be able to make Elias Lindholm score. Elias Pettersson made Sam Lafferty score for a month. Do you remember that, Harmon? Sam Lafferty, the guy who's playing on the 4th line now, can't fit in the top 6, is not a top 6 player. There was a time when we were asking, like, oh man, can Sam Lafferty be a top 6 player because he's playing with Elias Pettersson? Putting Elias Lindholm on Elias Pettersson's wing is going to do wonders for the Canucks. The Canucks just got, this is the best fit for them. As much as I talk about Adam Henrique, Frank Vatrano, all this other stuff, all these other players, this is the best fit available for them on the trade market. They get it done before the month of February.
Well, also remember, I think the better example might even be Anthony Beauvillier last year. Remember when the Canucks acquired him? It was on a tear down the stretch. People were comparing his point totals to Horvat and how Beauvillier was outproducing Bo, and everybody was like, oh man, this guy's a piece of the puzzle. No, it was just that Pettersson was elevating him. In Lindholm's case, so I went back and I watched every goal that he scored in that year that he was playing with Tkachuk and Gaudreau, scored the 42 goals. And what stands out is he's got such a quick and accurate release from the slot, but he needs somebody to get him the puck there, because Lindholm isn't the type of player that's going to carry the puck into the scoring area himself. There were so many goals where Gaudreau would be controlling the puck either on the left side and he's snapping an east-west pass, or more commonly, they're controlling the play down low off a cycle. Lindholm finds a way to get lost in the slot, and Lindholm's office is basically like, picture the right faceoff dot just inside it. He's got a pretty lethal one-timer from there. And again, it's not that he's got such a hard shot, it's how quick the release is. And what happens in those situations is if he's with a playmaker like Gaudreau, Tkachuk, Elias Pettersson, JT Miller, those players draw so much attention. The defensemen and goalies have to turn their backs when those types of playmakers are controlling the puck down low. That means they can't pay attention to other players that are lurking in the slot. Lindholm, A, knows how to find that open ice, and B, again, it's not that he's got the hardest shot, but he lets it go right away before the goalie has a chance to get set. Now, the problem is when he's in Calgary right now, he doesn't have anybody to get him the puck in those situations, meaning by the time Lindholm is shooting and getting a lot of his chances off, the goalie is already set. So the value of his quick, accurate release, you're not able to really capitalize on it. And that's why this year he's had to be a little bit more of a playmaker, more of a setup man, which isn't quite the what he's best at as an offensive player. And that's why when I was taking the time to digest the trade, how he fits with the Canucks, one of my biggest takeaways was, I know earlier a few weeks ago we were talking about keeping the Lotto line together, get a second line center who can drive play. I really want to see Lindholm with one of Pettersson or Miller, because that's how you're going to maximize his offensive output, is by playing him with an elite playmaker. So that's where right now I'm looking at it. And my initial thought in terms of a potential top 6 setup is you have Mikheyev, Pettersson, Lindholm, and then keep Suter, Miller, Besser. Not to mention, this gives you extra flexibility from a matchup perspective, because now you've got 2 guys in Pettersson and Lindholm, plus Mikheyev, who's reliable defensively, who are high-end two-way players. Now JT Miller doesn't necessarily have to every night go up against Nathan McKinnon or go up against Connor McDavid. You have 2 options there, and that is massive in terms of in-game adjustments and the matchup game going to the playoffs.
Aside from this not being an overpay, this trade just makes the Canucks so much better. And I think if you're a Canucks fan, you should be looking at the fact that your team is first in the NHL standings and just made a move, basically the best move they could have possibly made, I would say, in terms of the player they're getting and the fit for the player. I know his offense is down, folks. He's going to score a lot. I'm almost going to have to throw out another catch-up bet here, but he's going to score a lot in Vancouver. He is going to put up the points in Vancouver, and you can bookmark this. You can do what you want. You can quote me on it when the season's all said and done. Elias Lindholm is going to be fantastic with the Vancouver Canucks. I've been saying it for months. And I'm really excited about it. So I'm saying it again. 7 All-Stars for the... Oh, sorry, you had something there. Go on, Harm.
One more point I wanted to quickly make, just in terms of the overall package, is I know that there's a natural reaction when you see first-round pick in a trade package, plus the prospect in Brzustewicz, to go, oh, that's a lot to give up potentially for a rental. But the thing to keep in mind is first-round picks are not created equally. I mean, if the Canucks win the Pacific, they're guaranteed a selection in the mid to late 20s, regardless of how deep they go in the playoffs. So Colorado, for example, they picked 27th last summer, despite getting eliminated in the first round of the playoffs, simply because they won the Central Division. Now, when you look at the value of draft picks in the middle of the first round versus after 20, the probabilities of landing an impact player drop off the map substantially. This is where I went back and looked at 5 draft classes between 2015 to 2019 and sort of divvied it up and went, okay, how many picks in the middle of the first round versus late in the first round turn into impact players? And by impact players, I mean a top 6 forward, a top 4 defenseman, or a starting goalie. From picks 11 to 19, 42% become impact NHLers. So that's pretty good. From 20 to 31, it's only 20%. So you've got a 1 in 5 shot. You would need on average 5 first round picks to hit 1 impact player in that range. So I'm not worried about giving that pick up, because there's an extremely high probability that that player won't amount to anything.
And folks, this is the thing that we're saying at Harmon. Excellent point about draft pick value. But this is the thing that we're saying is, you go back, and yes, we and other Canucks fans out there as well used to complain that, the Canucks weren't good, but they were trading their picks. Then it was an issue. The Canucks are a good team. The Canucks are a good hockey team. They're at the top of the NHL standings. This is what good teams do. Do you remember how often, Harmon, we would watch the last manager team work and we would say, hey, folks, this is not what good teams do. Other teams aren't doing this. The Canucks are the only team that are doing this. This is what good teams do. The Canucks are just doing what good teams do. Again, I can't believe I see people complaining about Joni Jurmo being in this trade. I can't believe it. I honestly, anyways, I'm not gonna keep going on Joni Jurmo. But folks, you've got the best record in the NHL. They just went and got the best option available, and they didn't have to give up anything crazy to go get it. It was quantity, not quality. The Canucks get by far the best player in the trade. And man, Even this angle that, oh, well, it's not a sign and trade, like he didn't sign an extension, he's maybe just a rental. You just freed up $5.5 million for next year with this move. I ask you this, Harman, rhetorical question. I don't actually want you to answer it. And I ask all the people out there, if you were trying to improve this team and you said, you know what, we made a mistake signing Andrei Kuzmenko to the contract that we did, and that's clearly how this management regime feels. If they went out on the open market and went to a team like Chicago or went to a team with cap space and said, hey, we want to give you this guy, what's it going to cost us? What pick are we going to have to attach for you to take on this guy's salary and give us back like a 7th round pick or future considerations? I don't know. Maybe like a 2nd, a 3rd round pick to get out of 2 years at 5.5. Teams are going to know you're in trouble. Maybe that's exaggerating. Probably a 3rd round pick. Doesn't matter. Does not matter. What I'm saying is that the Canucks accomplished this while getting a great player back in return. This is a great piece of business. I really like this trade for the Canucks. Don't know how many more times I can say that on this show, but man, it is quantity that the Canucks gave up, and they got the quality back in this trade.
The Canucks also, I like the fact that if you're going to make this trade, jump out ahead and do it as early as possible for a few reasons. Number one, there aren't a lot of high-end players available on the trade deadline market this year. Even somebody like a Jake Gensel, there's no guarantee that Pittsburgh is going to trade him. They may still be thinking we can make the playoffs or we want to re-sign him. And so if it wasn't going to be Gensel, man, the list of potential targets was pretty thin. And considering how many other teams may have thought that, hey, this could be our year, given how wide open the field is, I think that could have worked in Sellers' favor this deadline. It wasn't like last year where you had Timo Meier and Bo Horvat available. A lot of quality names to potentially go after. Even among defensemen, like there were a lot of quality defensemen available last year, like Matthias Ekholm, whereas there's nobody that exciting on this year's sort of board in terms of true all-star caliber difference makers. Also, by jumping ahead and getting it done, number one, it gives Lindholm extra time to find his footing with the Canucks, which matters because when the Devils acquired Timo Meier last year or the Isles acquired Bo Horvat, I guess it was a little bit different in Horvat's instance because that trade happened around this time. But you do see examples of players that if they're moved right at the deadline, they don't have enough time to fit in, mesh, and then they disappoint in the playoffs, kind of similar to how it went for somebody like a Timo Meier. These extra 6 weeks or so, I like it from that perspective of, okay, Lindholm can learn his role in the power play. He can mesh it on the PK. You can experiment and find the perfect top 6 fit. That matters. Plus, it gives you extra time to try and win the Western Conference, which that matchup means a lot in the sense of determining who you're going to play in the playoffs. If you finish first in the West and you're playing a team like Seattle or St. Louis, Nashville, Arizona, I think they're an outside shot. I don't think they'll be the ones, but one of those types of teams rather than one of the other top teams in the West, man, that would be a massive advantage for the Canucks heading into the playoffs. And adding Lindholm now rather than doing it on the March 8th deadline gives you extra time to try and continue to pad your lead.
And of course, you also just took him away. You took Lindholm away from all those teams that you're competing with that might have wanted to make a trade for him because you got your business done so early. 941 people in the YouTube live chat right now. Folks, make sure you subscribe to the Canucks Army YouTube channel, the one you're watching this on right now. Follow us on Twitter as well. And of course, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. I know we've got a lot of new people. Okay, we're being challenged here, Harm. Let's talk about it. War Clyde 89 in the YouTube live chat said, okay, a lot of positivity aside, what if he doesn't fit? What if Elias Lindholm doesn't fit with this team, Harman?
It happens, and Rutherford acknowledged a couple of press conferences ago, I believe, that does happen from time to time. And look, that's where when you're in the rental market, that's part of the risk. A lot of times you make these trades and the player either doesn't fit or in the case of a team like a Boston, the player does fit, like Tyler Bertuzzi and Dmitry Orlov did, but you still get bounced in the first round. Yeah, absolutely. That's a legit possibility. There is downside risk there, but first of all, I'm not worried about any of the assets that they gave up haunting them, right? If anything, it would have been the opportunity cost of, okay, what else could you have done potentially with these pieces? It's not like 3 or 4 years from now, I would be pretty surprised, regardless of whether Lindholm fits or not, that we'd look back at this trade and go, man, can't believe they gave up that late first round pick. Look at that.
Yeah.
Look at this impact player that this late first round pick has turned into. I would be surprised a little bit if Brzustewicz turns into a top 4 defenseman for a really long time, especially, I mean, considering you already have Hronek and Willander as pieces that can help you now and in Willander's case in the future. And then the other side of it is, even among players with term, there weren't a lot of available players that stood out, right? Because I'm one of the first players that one of the first people that go, I don't love rentals in most situations, but even as we were brainstorming players with term left, there weren't a ton that really stood out to me. Like, we brought up Pavel Buchnevich the other day. I still don't know that there's a good chance St. Louis is even going to entertain moving him. Philadelphia's not going to entertain moving Travis Konechny. Minnesota's not going to entertain moving Joel Eriksson Ek. Even a team like Ottawa, a lot of people were talking about maybe Claude Giroux. A month ago, Elliot Friedman was reporting that the Senators want to add veteran sort of leaders to help teach their core how to sort of fix their habits and get back on track. If that's how they're thinking, are they really going to be thinking about moving Claude Giroux, who also, I believe, has trade protection? So there weren't a lot of alternatives with what you were going to do with those pieces. So what, were you just going to sit on the sidelines or I don't know, like make a move for Frank Vetrano, which, I mean, wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world, but Lindholm's a much better player than Vetrano is.
So we saw some reports, I think Patrick Johnson had it, Cam Robinson as well, about Chris Tanev potentially being part of another deal that these two teams are working on. Shout out to everybody in the Twitter as well, the Twitter and Facebook chat. Over 200 on Twitter, over 115 on Facebook right now, folks. We really appreciate it. Harman, is this team done? Is the question I want to ask you. I'm going to say no. I don't know if they're going to get Chris Tanev. I would assume that while I still think there's room for improvement in the forward group, I would say that they are going to go out and get a defenseman if they get anything, but I don't know if it's going to be any sort of big move from here on out. Like, they might be done. I just don't think they are with how early they got their business done here.
Yeah, I could see them making another depth add, especially heading closer to the heading closer to the deadline. You're going to get a better idea of how everybody's meshing. What are your lineup combinations? What are your potential weaknesses? Also, sometimes you run into injuries, right? You may end up in a situation where another defenseman goes down or another forward goes down with an injury, kind of like how Carson Soucy's unavailable right now. And at that point, you may go, all right, we want a Band-Aid solution for this to shore up our depth, and that could be the route they go. So yeah, I'm with you. I'd be a little bit surprised if this is all they do, but again, I'm not expecting it to necessarily be the biggest a biggest move coming up next.
Jerry Lee pointed this out. Why not a sign and trade? Why did the Canucks give up too much for a rental? Jerry, you got to rewind the show, but I'm going to focus on the second aspect of that and why it wasn't a sign and trade. When the Canucks traded for Nikita Zadorov, we talked to Patrick Allvin very shortly after that trade, Harm, and the idea of an extension came up, and Allvin said, we're in no rush. If it works out, I hope it works out that we can extend him, but why are you extending a guy at market value who hasn't played for your team? It's one thing if you're going out and getting a superstar and doing that, but do you know who the Canucks did that with more recently? Brandon Sutter. They traded for Brandon Sutter, and before he even played a game, before you even saw how he fit in Vancouver, they extended him. And hey, we love Brandon Sutter, the person. That contract was atrocious. It was atrocious the moment it was signed. It was atrocious the moment he played his first game as a Vancouver Canuck. I shouldn't say moment it was first signed. It was fair value for what you thought you were getting. But the whole point is that didn't work out. And you had him for all of those years because you made your trade and you wanted it to look great. So for the optics, you went out and extended him right away. See how the guy fits before you do that. You have that luxury with Lindholm. You have that luxury with Zadorov. There is no need to go out and immediately sign this guy to an extension. There is no need for the Canucks to do that. And one thing this regime is so good at, Harm, is not caring about what people think. They don't care how the optics of them signing Kuzmenko to an extension, immediately saying, yeah, you know what? We made a mistake, but we're just going to eat it. We're just going to eat the mistake and we're going to make the best of it. And that's what they did with this trade. They're not afraid to look dumb. They make their mistakes and they own up to them. They're quick to own up to them. They don't double down on their mistakes like we saw with the last regime. We saw that a lot. We saw with the Goodbranson extension. Yeah, that happened, folks. Goodbranson got an extension in Vancouver after that flop of a trade. We're not getting into all that. But Harmon, I wanted to answer that question from the chat that it shouldn't be a sign and trade. I get, do you agree with me that your sign and trades should really be saved for if you're going to get a guy like Matthew Tkachuk?
Yeah, especially because Lindholm, he's approaching 30. His value has been quite up and down depending on who exactly he's playing with, the environment. You want to see what exactly he is before you commit a lot of term and dollars, especially because from the Canucks perspective, it's not as if they're swimming in future cap space. They don't know yet what Elias Pettersson is going to cost. They don't know yet what Filip Hronek is going to cost. They don't know yet what they're going to want to do with Teddy Blueger, Dakota Joshua. They have a number of expiring defensemen on the blue line that they're going to have to replace. There's a lot of business that needs to be done, a lot of uncertainty around the cap from the Canucks perspective for next season. So jumping the gun and paying him a huge contract, I think would have been a risk. I mean, just look at Calgary themselves. You've spoken about the risk of when you make a trade, immediately signing a guy when you don't know if the fit is going to be there, especially when it's different, as you said, when it's a player like a Matthew Tkachuk, who's young, who's in his prime, who's a legit superstar. Look at Calgary with Jonathan Huberdeau, right? That's a perfect example. Immediately sign him to an extension before they know he's going to be a fit. And that's now one of the worst contracts in the NHL. So there's time to sort all that out.
And Harmon, when you go into an offseason like the Canucks are, where you've got Filip Hronek, you've got Elias Pettersson, you just brought those two names up, you want as much flexibility as possible. You want to have all that clarity where you can say, okay, we have this much money to work with, we have these holes on our roster, and we need to fix them. You want as much space and as much clarity and I guess flexibility as you can possibly have. And the Canucks freeing up $5.5 million for next year makes this trade alone a win. And I really like this trade. And Brian Choi is asking if you like the trade. And yes, Brian, we both like the trade. I think I like it a little more than Harmon does, because I've been talking about Lindholm for months, but Harmon is a big fan. Also, folks, we need one more person to join the YouTube live chat. I'm just watching it. We're at 999 on the YouTube live chat of people watching right now. We've never touched 1,000 in the history of this show. Please don't leave, but hopefully we get one more person joining. I gotta say, I'm one of those people. Well, yeah, you absolutely should if you ain't already. But I'm absolutely one of those people that when people point out stuff like that, I'm like, oh, I gotta drop the number. Like, if I'm 5 away from 1,000 followers, I'm like, oh, I didn't know I was following you. Unfollow. I'm just kidding. I don't always do that, but I have done that a couple times. I think it's funny, but I hope people don't do it to us. I hope we hit 1,000 on this show. But Harmon, I wanted to kind of talk about the lineup a little bit here. And I was just poking around at the Canucks lines, and obviously we know Pia Suter is going to be, probably bumped off the first power play unit. I mean, Kuzmenko is going to leave a hole on the first power play unit as well, right? To some extent, like you would have to replace Kuzmenko, you'd have to replace Suter. Well, Kuzmenko, I guess, would be on the second. Yeah. Well, yeah. It took me a second. Kuzmenko was on the second power play unit. So you've got some power play time to go around. But I think the main point, and Grady's just pulling up the lines for us here. Look at him go. Grady Sass, fastest hands in the West. I got to say, the lines that they're going to be able to deploy, there's so much versatility that the Canucks now have in their lineup, because this guy can play center. We hit 1,000. Sorry, people started leaving, so I was worried that I'd not be able to bring it up again. We hit 1,000 viewers in the YouTube live chat. This is insane. Take your screenshots, folks. This is awesome. Thank you so much to all of you here. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Harmon, sorry, I interrupted myself. Back to the lines. There's so much versatility that's going to come to the lineup. He's going to be the first guy over the boards, Elias Lindholm, that is, on the penalty kill. He's going to be on the first power play unit. Where do you like him the most? I say it's with Elias Pettersson, and I know you said it has to be either Elias Pettersson or JT Miller, but if it is Elias Pettersson, first of all, where do you like him the most? But if it is Elias Pettersson, does he play wing or does he play center?
This is a good question. I like Pettersson driving play through the middle. Plus, Lindholm has experience playing wing. So I would put Lindholm on right wing. It doesn't really matter ultimately because he'd be taking a lot of the draws anyway, probably the majority, considering how skilled he is there. Again, I think he's won 55% of his draws this season. I also, again, even when you had the Lotto line together and Pettersson was technically on the wing, I know it doesn't make a huge difference, but I probably would have preferred it the other way around with Miller on the wing and Pettersson down the middle. I just think when Pettersson's making plays from the middle, he has both sides that he can make plays on, which I think gives him more flexibility, makes him more dangerous playmaker. Plus Lindholm, the way he scores, again, I spoke about him as a trigger man. A lot of his goals look similar to watching Miller and Besser play together, where it's like, Miller's controlling the play down low and Besser will be hanging around the slot area, just sort of waiting to unleash a sort of quick one-timer. That suits well to a winger's skill set. Plus, Lindholm is somebody that can help on board battles, is going to be good along the walls. So, yeah, that's how I would lean in terms of, Mikheyev, Pettersson, Lindholm.
I know we touched on this a bit earlier, Harman, but you brought up Elias Lindholm's finishing ability in the middle. And one conversation I had with Rick Tocchet earlier this season was just about Brock Besser's newfound ability to get into that, those soft spots of the ice where it's right in the middle and you're in the slot, but you only really have a second to kind of push off the defender and find yourself with some space. That's something Elias Lindholm does very, very well. So the Canucks are adding a guy who, in my opinion, is probably going to be the second best, maybe if not the best guy at doing that behind Brock Besser, of course. Brock Besser's scored a lot of his goals from the middle, being able to find that space. Like, that's a special skill. And that's something that, look, I never played in the NHL. I don't know that. Rick Tocchet's pointed that out to me in conversations that I've had with him, is that when you get to the middle of the ice, you actually don't have a ton of space to create that, a ton of time to create that space for yourself. That's something that Elias Lindholm is really good. It's just manufacturing space right in this high slot, and it's going to be really important down the stretch, I think, for the Canucks to have this guy on their team.
Especially because his one-timer, this is the key. He doesn't need a big wind-up. It's quick, and that's the biggest thing, right? We're not talking about clap bombs, but the year that he scored 42 goals, I looked at both his regular season and playoff production. I counted 17 one-time goals. Again, that wasn't loading up from Ovi's spot and blasting it. That was just short, like a half wind-up and quick bang. Some of them didn't even necessarily look like traditional one-timers, but it was like one touch. He's good at a pass is coming to him and he's not going to flub it. He has good hands. He's going to be able to let it rip really quickly before goalies get set. And again, you'll see a lot of goals in his highlight reel where like he'll get that shot off and then the goalie's glove is like half a second late just because he had no time to react. And that's the importance of, with his line mates, he needs somebody that can make either side to side passes or control the puck below the dots, have both the defenseman and goalie sort of turning and not really having Lindholm on the radar. And then when that quick low to high pass is made, boom, you got to let that rip right away. That's literally Lindholm's bread and butter.
All right. This is great stuff, folks. This is great. There's so many people in the YouTube live chat. Like I've said 4 times already. I'm going to have to say it again. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are live Monday to Friday at 2 p.m. every day. We usually have a studio. We usually don't do our show from home. We usually do it at a beautiful studio. Go check out our old videos. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We are live 2 p.m. Monday through Friday, except for this week. We did take these final 3 days off, or we thought that they were going to be 3 days off. We ended up doing a show tonight, but we will be back on Monday, again, Monday through Friday. Grady, do we know when Sekeres and Price are going live? Because Jordan Savage in our YouTube live chat is wondering as well. They're our teammates. 8 p.m. 8 p.m. Sekeres and Price are going live. So, folks, coming up right next is the Sekeres and Price show. Make sure you go check them out as well over on the Sekeres and Price YouTube channel. All right, Harman, any closing thoughts on this trade and what we saw tonight?
I just think it's an exciting time to be a Canucks fan. Look, there's risk when you go out and you pay the market value price for a rental, but it's a fun risk to kind of take in this situation. It's not reckless. Look, I would have called this reckless or not have been a huge fan of this trade if it had meant giving up a Willander or a Lekaramaki, or the first round pick was a 2025 where you don't have that certainty of, hey, it's going to probably be later in the 20s. But here, I'm not too worried about the return potentially haunting them. And now at this point, it's just a matter of, can Lindholm fit with this team? Can he fit in the top six? Can he fit on the power play? Can he give the team a boost as a right-handed centerman who can kill penalties? I'm confident that on paper, it will translate. Now, that doesn't always work out in practice because, again, you look at Meyer or Horvat's slow start last year. You're talking about big changes, new city, new teammates, new system. So there is that downside risk, but I like this as a calculated gamble. It's an exciting time to watch this Canuck team hopefully go on a run this year.
Chris Faber in the YouTube live chat saying congrats on 1,000 fellas. Chris, thanks for watching, buddy. We appreciate your support. My closing thoughts, Harm? I'm going to give it over to a Flames fan in our YouTube live chat. Teron Boot wrote this. If you win the cup, this is the best deal ever. And as a Flames fan, I can live with that. We're going to have a lot more on this. Next week, we're going to break it down a lot. We've got an all-star game tomorrow. I briefly mentioned this, but 8 all-stars going to the all-star game for the Vancouver Canucks. You got Al Murdoch, who's the PA announcer. You've got Rick Tocchet, who's the head coach of one of the teams. You got Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson as captains with Michael Bublé. The draft happens tomorrow, so that's going to be a lot of fun. Go to CanucksArmy.com as well for all your coverage. And, of course, The Athletic. We should also shout out The Athletic. That's where Harman writes. CanucksArmy.com will have a lot of coverage of the draft tomorrow and all that fun stuff. It's going to be a good one. It's going to be a good one. And RE45 said Quads is still trying to figure out if Myers will fit in the first power play unit. The net front presence. And folks, there's a lot of new ones, new listeners here. That's an old running joke that we've got on this show. But yes, folks, thanks so much for the support. We really, really appreciate it. And hey, if the Canucks win the cup, this trade is a set slam dunk win. But for now, we will close it out there. For my co-host, Harman Dial, my name is Dave Quadrelli. Thank you so much for joining us on a late night edition, well, it's only 7:30, of Canucks Conversation. Canucks Conversation with Harman and Quads every weekday at 2 p.m. Be sure to check it out on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. And if you missed it, go check it out on your favorite podcast catcher.